Nothing human is foreign to me.
Ed and I have been friends for more than 40 years. We went to high school together, and for a while we were in college together as well at Syracuse University. And that's when we really went off the deep end at that time, from normal middle class 1980s kids to exploding with, well, basically what happened to us, Ed.
Well, I guess I would characterize us more as working class kids. And I think that that's important to mention because when we hit Syracuse, we were definitely not with what I would consider a majority of our peers.
Oh, hell no.
And I think that was the first shock.
Remember when your first roommate would pile through your drawers to make fun of your clothes
Yes,
because they weren't fancy enough?
they weren't fancy enough, and there was a mythology that working people worked as working people because they really didn't mind poverty and they really didn't mind doing manual labor, and it was suited for them and they were suited for it.
Yeah, we were there for them to make fun of, apparently, and that's still going on today. All the gaslighting that we're seeing. Myself, I'm an immigrant. My family came to the United States when I was in elementary school from Italy, and I grew up in a middle class town. But Ed is right, actually. My father was a machinist. We lived paycheck to paycheck. But the reason why I said middle class is because we tend to group everybody in the middle class. It's kind of an American thing, isn't it, Ed? Like
Yeah,
almost as a way to obscure the fact that there is a working class. So what's the difference to you? What really is the crux of the difference between middle class and working class?
to me, I think that middle class is kind of another mythology. I don't really look at people in upper, middle upper. I think that those are based on income. And the way I look at things is people that can make money based on money that they already have and the power that that gives them. And then there's the rest of the people who basically have to sell what they have, which is their knowledge, their skill, and their time, their
Or their
energy,
muscle?
their muscle, and their energy to those other people. And I think that, regardless of what you make, it's whether or not you have to sell your labor and your skill and your muscle, or whether or not you buy that from those other people. I think those are really the only two classes that matter. So I think whether you get paid a little bit more, whether you have a little bit more control over your life, those things certainly matter to some degree. But in the end, can you quit tomorrow and just skate off of the earnings that you have from stocks and bonds and investments? Or if you quit tomorrow, will you be looking for another job and someone else to buy your labor power?
So what you're saying is that even though a lot of people, especially when we were kids, considered themselves middle class, they really weren't. That it was a mythology.
It was. And I think the answer to that question is what you said, paycheck to paycheck.
Paycheck to paycheck. Yeah, especially now. So what we want to do in this podcast is really delve into a lot of what's happening in the world today, especially in this country, interweave different perspectives, look at grand historical drivers, try to see what's influencing us and what we can do about it, how we can actually have some agency or some say in our shared destiny. So in this episode, I think we're just going to overview what we'll be covering in the next months to come. Each episode is going to look at a main historical drivers influencing us today. We'll be looking at geography and the environment, and that has a lot to do with resources. The capitalist system has really expanded into the world to maintain its hegemony, basically. How all of it, the fundamental aspects of why capitalism has expanded as such, is basically to create this ecosystem of profit and ultimately for their shareholders. We're dealing with pollution issues, climate change, resource exhaustion, all these things that are related to geography and the environment. I think there's an urgent need to re-examine these things from a more ecological, people-centered perspective and stop this prioritization of profit over everything else.
I think another thing that I hope that people get out of this is that I know that there's a lot of confusion. I know there's a lot of worry. There's a lot of where did this come from? And I hope that one of the things we can also do is to give context and perspective that this isn't exactly coming out of the blue. This isn't exactly something that is unexpected. That there is actually a historical trend that this particular result has already been put in place since probably a little bit before the Reagan administration. And hopefully, Joe and I can actually weave that story together for you and help you understand that this isn't something that just exploded with Trump's inauguration, or even his first term. That this has been put in place for quite a long time.
Yes, it has. I'm thinking back to when I was in my late teens, and when I finally came to the realization that the world that I thought wasn't, that there was a lot of injustices, a lot of real messed up patterns in the world. And one of my friends who was African American, he disappeared for a while. He was gone. I didn't know where he was. And I asked him, well, what happened to you? And he was like, well, I was in jail. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I was at this bar, and there was a bit of an incident, nothing real, but the cops came and they just put me away. He didn't do anything wrong. I wouldn't have experienced that being a white person at that time as he did. So it was those kinds of things that all of a sudden started to make me see that not all is as it was, as I was told it was. I don't know. Do you have anything like that when the veil started to lift just a little bit?
Study and understanding the labor movement and understanding how that story unfolded. And, my father was always a union member, and I was in a union before I ended up going to UMass. And I can remember reading about the total injustice there, and how at one point people just trying to organize themselves into labor unions before unions were legal in the United States, how they were met with slaughter. I mean, people were killed. People were killed in tents as they slept. And I can remember that. And then I can also remember learning about how this violence was also used to divide the working people through racism, through nativism versus immigration. And, I related that to my own family's history. I'm only second generation through your history and your family's history, and through the neighborhoods that we lived in. And then also, as I learned more about colonialism and neocolonialism and how the CIA had done things in the name of democracy that were unbelievably anti-democratic. And how were we supposed to reconcile that? And of course, we were going to school during the time of the Iran-Contra scandal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I had learned about what had happened in Nicaragua and the revolution in Nicaragua. And from my perspective, it was very democratic, and it was helping people, especially poor people, working people. And then I would hear this narrative coming out of the White House that I could not justify with the facts. I knew a lot of people who had come from Central America to study. I knew a lot of people that had actually visited Nicaragua, and the facts that I learned just weren't consistent with the facts that were coming out of the White House.
We were learning about the death squads.
Correct.
And people disappearing in the middle of the night, and little countries like El Salvador, losing 100,000 people, a huge chunk of their population, to just death squads. And then I remember you and I together got turned down to the book, The Open Veins of Latin America, which talked all about that. And then we read the People's History of the United States. And it was just that eye opening that you get sometimes when you go to university and you begin just to experience all this knowledge that was just really close to you before.
When we were involved in trying to remove the CIA from our campus recruitment.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really got me was one of the buildings that we occupied, where we had been talking to the police while they were in there with us, up until a certain point, and how they were all buddy and understanding. And then at a certain point, there was some chatter on the radio, and all of a sudden it was almost like they were robotic.
Yeah.
Their faces just changed, and they became exactly what we read about in class when we read Louis Althusser. Yeah. They became the repressive state apparatus, the coldness, the brutality. And remember now, we weren't armed. We weren't threatening anybody. We just wanted to stop what was going on in that building because they were scheduling appointments for recruitment. It was all we were doing. We weren't harming anyone. We were actually helping some of the workers do some of their other work. Just really eye-opening to me. Really eye-opening.
Yeah, I remember facing off against a whole 50 or 100 state troopers coming at us, and in front of them was a whole bunch of police dogs, and they were pulling at their leashes coming towards us, and we were sitting on the ground, and there they were in their riot gears, and I'm like, wow.
And we had hoodies.
Yeah, that was a real radicalizing moment that they would go through all of that just for a bunch of students just sitting in front of a building and just trying to make a point to protest.
Which I thought was guaranteed by the First Amendment.
And then, of course, you would see the people in the bushes filming us and recording our faces and
on the rooftops.
on the rooftop. And sometimes we'd go up to them and kind of like just tease them a bit, just run off. And you have to remember, this was not the 70s. This was the 80s, the mid to early 80s, where there was a backlash, kind of a retrenchment of a lot of the radicalism in the 70s. So it was a much more conservative time. So there weren't that many of us doing this at the university. It was a small group. We were the weird ones.
Right. And this was Reagan's America.
So in a way, it's kind of similar to what's happening today, but though what's happening today is I think far more powerful.
The response
more brutal,
much more brutal.
We had a period of openness, and then bang, everything gets shut down again.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in high school, we used to have it was an open campus, and then it wasn't anymore. Like all the experimentation that was happening in the 70s just was kind of shut down. All the social progress was being challenged, just like now. But today, you're right. There's far more of a brutality to it, gut wrenching sometimes for people. My child is transgender, and I know they're just all of a sudden it's basically Jim Crow for transgender people now, out of the blue overnight. Bang, here it is. That's the kind of thing we want to cover in this podcast, but we want to do it in a way that makes sense and it connects to every day in the here and now, not just be pie in the sky theoretical perspectives, but really kind of grounded. Both Ed and I have a huge amount of knowledge of this stuff. We've been learning and training and teaching and experiencing the sort of the political economy and the cultural practices of what we want to do is basically offer what we've learned, especially to people right now that need it really badly, trying to make sense of what's going on. How do we gather ourselves in order to resist what's happening and bring about a better world?
Also, we have to understand that nothing that we face right now is hopeless. The key, though, is for us to organize and get together with other people for a lot of different reasons. Number one, because that's the vehicle of change, is organization. But secondly, it's also how you will feel better about yourself. I work with an organization just as an anecdote, but also a good example. And just the other night, we held a study group, and we had expected maybe a dozen people, and over 30 showed up. For 2 solid hours, we discussed politics and even some theory. And we never expected 30 people to stay for 2 hours, but they did. And that was really heartening for all of us who helped to organize the event, but also it was also heartening because most of them were not members of our group. They were new people. They actually expressed interest in coming to the monthly membership meeting. So
there is definitely a hunger for knowledge about this, what to do, how to organize, how to make sense of what's happening, and how to contextualize that in our own experience as living, breathing human beings in this world that need to not only survive and hopefully thrive even, but also contribute to challenging what's happening, be visionary in terms of how can we create a society that makes sense to us, that makes sense in our heart, minds, and souls. And it's not about profit, it's about people. I'm a teacher. I teach in college. I teach geography. And I've been working with young people for decades. And what I'm seeing today is a real eagerness to understand and to face what's happening, and also a real fear about what's happening. And you're right, Ed, we should not despair. We should not give up. We should not fall into that nihilism that just takes all your energy away. Because there are things that we can do. There are things we can do as individuals and as communities, and there's things we can do as citizens of this country, and there's things we can do as as members of a human race on this beautiful, fragile planet that we need to take care of.
And I think that's another thing that we hope that you get out of this too, is that in America, we tend to be very secluded in our understanding of the rest of the world. The rest of the world is moving forward. I assure you they are. And it's very inspiring to the both of us. And we're going to open you up to that as well. And I think that you'll get a lot out of that too.
Yeah, it's actually astonishing what's happening in the world, and Americans just are not getting that information. I teach geopolitics. I've been, like I said, geographer for 40 years. I follow this stuff, and what's happening now is incredibly transformative. There's two ways, there's two dimensions here. One, what is the basically the internal colonization that's happened within the United States. And that's fundamentally centered on class, as we'll talk about a lot, and who controls the resources, who controls the government, and what our role is in that as regular people. And then the other dimension is the global one, that we are struggling to come together as a global community. And we've made great strides in doing that, although there are some great challenges as well.
It's very inspiring. So I hope you continue to listen, and I hope you get as much out of it as we intend to put into it, and as we have ourselves gotten out of our study and our perspective on the world.
Now, Ed and I are philosophically, we're pretty aligned, although we're different people and we approach our own agency and our own advocacy for change a little bit differently, and you'll see that as we go along. We're not always going to agree on particularly tactics and strategies. And I think that's a good thing, because we do want to have that conversation about how to find the best ways of moving forward as a community. We need to be bridge builders, but we also need to be warriors.
The single thing we have to remember is that unity is more important than being right. And that's in our own egos, that working together and that numbers are our strength, and that's how we'll prevail. Being the purest of the pure is not more important than actually making sure that we do the things that relieve the most suffering for the most people.
To that, the world is vast and incredibly complex. And whatever ideas we have about the world, we always have to approach them with a humble attitude that there's so much more we don't know. We tend to be mesmerized by our own biases, and we don't realize that there's so much more to add to the evidence behind what's happening. At some point, people will try to convince you, they'll sort of cherry pick pieces of evidence about what's going on, and they'll weave a very beautiful and nice story, and it's a compelling story, but it just may not be that really connected to reality. It may be missing out so much. And that's true of every single one of us. So if we are humble like that, if we can understand our own limits of knowledge, then we're not so hung up about being right all the time. What's more important is being unified. Come together, we talk about what's important, our ethics, our strategies. We listen to each other.
It's really interesting, because what we're really trying to say is that we need to learn to accept diversity on the left, and to accept diversity and to move forward with that acceptance, whether or not we agree 100% with it.
And it seems crazy to say that, because everyone associates the left with diversity. The left is very open to certain kinds of diversities of identity, but we also need to embrace an openness about ideas and an openness about evidence. We're trying to figure out what the world is like and how things work together.
And what the most successful strategies are based on the actual evidence that we see in the world.
We're not going to tell you what to do. We've learned the hard way that's just a dumb way to approach it. Right? What we want to do is just get you to think about things in a broader way.
And to be able to be critical, and to always look at things with one eyebrow raised and ask for more evidence, and understand maybe at some level what is evidence actually and what is not.
And that includes being critical of our own ideas and our own ideologies.
And then move forward with conviction, with other comrades, with other people who are like-minded, and to continue to have hope. And that's really all we can ask. And I think if we do that, then all this chaos that's being created right now, all of this rapid fire movement in 100 different directions, and all of these terrible, terrible things that are coming out of certain people's mouths, they can just bounce off us. And we'll know who we are, we'll know what we need to do, and we'll have faith in our own convictions and in our own path forward, and they won't really have much power over us.
And I think that idea of having convictions is also important. You can't be so wishy-washy that you give away what's real truly important to you. We all have lines we'll never cross, right? You don't compromise in some things like human rights. You don't compromise in human dignity. We can share that common bond. It is a coalition of people who have those same principles. They may be expressed differently. We might argue a little bit about the edges of them, but fundamentally, it is about dignity and respect of every single human being on this planet. That's why our name is what it is.
Nothing human is foreign to me.
That's right. So having said all that, let me just quickly go over the episodes that are coming. We're going to do an episode on looking at the larger geography of the world and including environmental issues and climate change. We're going to do an episode on technology and innovation, certainly talking about the AI revolution and robotics and a few other things and along those lines. We're going to be doing a few episodes probably on socioeconomics, the structures, class struggle. We'll be looking at sort of the world and the realm of ideas, beliefs, and ideologies in an episode or two that are related to this challenge we're facing today. We're going to be looking specifically at political power. What is power? What is governance? How does it all fit into this? What should we expect? What should we look out for? We will do some episodes on culture and basically the human psychology under capitalism, consumer culture, alienation that people feel, the loneliness. We'll also be doing some kind of groovier stuff on things like chaos and emerging complexity, sort of these black swan events that we're seeing, like the pandemic, and how that all plays into the picture. Again, we're really looking at historical things that really have shaped our world today.
So hope you continue to listen, and I hope that you get out of this the things that we intended. We kind of laid out the structure, the intentions, and we've also declared our bias up front, which I think is important, so you know what to expect. And look forward to the next episodes. We're going to try to be as periodic as possible. Obviously, we have a lot of other things going on, but we know that people who listen to podcasts have an expectation that they come out periodically and regularly, and they look forward to that. So we're going to try to meet those expectations. So thanks.
Thanks for listening.